Good afternoon, and welcome to another liberating episode of Diatribes from the Voice of Doom. And now here's your classical liberal and libertarian host, Voice of Doom. Hello. Good afternoon to all you freedom lovers and freedom fighters. I'm going to talk about freedom because that's my topic, which I will talk about now. So, I saw the little red-haired girl and didn't say a whole lot today. Had a couple guest stars on. Very upbeat show. And the guest stars took up half of the time spouting some gobbledygook about cyber attacks and sanctions, which were incomprehensible to your average idiot, or even your average so-called smart person. And that took up half the show, and then the little red-haired girl was having a very cordial tete-a-tete with the media, press. And the press did not press too hard. And I heard a couple strange things. Well, first of all, notice these guys on a certain side of a certain tribe are using the word lockstep a lot now. We're in lockstep with our allies. We're in lockstep with the unions. We're in lockstep with the cartel. We're in lockstep with our partners in the cyber, protection. Everything's in lockstep now, and every time I hear the word lockstep, I think goose step, and then I don't think good things. I don't think everybody has to be in lockstep. There is a Buddhist tenet and principle called Eishofuni, I believe, and it means many in body, one in mind. And that is good to be unified for the correct cause in order to create value in a society or a civilization. But that doesn't mean everybody has to think alike about everything. Because once you have that, you have a homogeny that could become boring. And it could become anathema to think anything differently. And I will explain about misinformation on the next episode, one or two down the road. But I do want to talk about freedom. And she was free to say that Petri Dish is working extensively on diplomatic channels to alleviate this border crisis we have on the other side of the planet. So we can rest assured things are well in hand. And I actually heard something a little different. I actually heard the little red-haired girl almost admit that they were wrong. And in a way, she did admit it. She did it in a very gentle way, soft landing for them. But they said that they may have created a wrong message when they said that, Armageddon was coming on Wednesday, because now they're wrong, and then they have to backtrack and say, well, I guess we were wrong. You just don't pinpoint things to one day. I found that out. That way you can keep an open-ended crisis. If you say something is going to happen on Wednesday and it doesn't happen, then they don't believe you after that, do they? They don't think there's a crisis because it didn't happen when you said. So you learned from that, didn't you? But let's go to freedom, because there's freedom lovers. And that phrase is turning into something that is something akin to white supremacy and Nazism, according to certain leaders. So the kind of freedom that you love, or the kind of freedom that you would fight for, may not necessarily be the correct freedom. Now, there's two sides to every coin. Okay, first of all, the truckers are way late And it's almost absurd to see them ranting. It's like a bunch of people protesting for better forest management in the middle of a burnt out forest where the trees have all been burned down already. It's kind of like a little late because we should have been in the streets probably about, I don't know, 8 or 9 months ago when the mandates started coming down. When everybody knew that there was something funny going on with how draconian they're being with certain serums and certain status and mass or no mass. That's another thing. Little red-haired girl comes out to give her speech or to introduce the two specialists, and nobody in the whole press room is wearing masks except the two specialists on either side. It looks sinister. Both wearing black masks, like we're the two sentries standing to the right and left of the little red-haired girl, and we have our masks on because we're afraid of getting something or giving something. Nobody else has their mask on. Now we'll take our mask off to talk. It's really weird. And that's part and parcel about why people are up in arms, because they don't know what to do, and I've already explained all that to you. But they're fighting for freedom, and then they keep saying, but 90% of the truckers have gotten the serum, so they're merely fighting for the rights of the 10%. Or they're fighting because they don't like showing a card, even though they complied already. I have complied, but I don't want to show you my card in order to cross the border, so we will clog up the country, basically. Which is fine, but there's two sides. I mean, if I was inconvenienced by a protest, then I would be pissed at the protesters too, because it's inconveniencing my life. That's human nature. You get mad at what's interrupting you, what's stopping you. That's freedom. I don't have my freedom to do what I need to do because of these people. So you see how freedom is very complicated? Very complicated. Now, one thing about protests that I've noticed is people do not take any heed or notice of them unless they become a problem. And I've noticed that with peaceful protests, people will gather together. They may even do it for a day or two, but it achieves nothing because it's not disruptive. In order for a protest to be effective, it has to disrupt to a certain extent so people take notice and go, let's do something about that. Vietnam. There were college riots, there was violence, there was killings. There were senseless killings, there were incursions and insurrections. And finally, there were big protests on the White House, not lawn, the mall. There's 100,000 people. And they weren't students. They were all middle class and mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers. And finally they go, we got to do something about this war because it's getting real unpopular. This truck thing is going to do the same thing, only it's a day late and a dollar short, as I've said. And the American version is going to be even later. I don't know what kind of situation we'll be in by the first week of March at the rate we're going. But freedom can be interpreted in many ways. I should be free to do whatever I want. That statement is fraught with peril, fraught with danger. So certain freedoms can't be allowed to happen. So let's go to another side of freedom. There are freedom fighters in the Ukraine. There are people in the Ukraine that want to separate from Ukraine and be a separate entity. Or perhaps they want to ally themselves with the Russians because they are Russian by heritage and by ancestry. So for whatever reason, there are factions in the Ukraine who want freedom from the Ukraine. Now, how that all plays out on an international geopolitical level remains to be seen. But there's many ways to create a pretext, as I said before. 1939. I said that a long time ago, and now the whatever we have in the government are catching on and saying there's going to be a pretext, there's going to be some incident that they create some false flag, they call it. Yeah, I said that a long time ago, so thanks, they're finally catching up. And there probably will be a pretext, and it could be almost anything. And who knows if there's going to be a blitzkrieg after the pretext, because they're in a perfect position for a blitzkrieg. And by blitzkrieg, I mean a simultaneous cyber attack, incursions, explosions, missiles, and bombs. And who's bombing who, nobody will never know. Because it could be anyone bombing anyone, and we can say it's anybody, because it's a false flag. So I'll get into misinformation and disinformation later, because you see how we'll never know anything for sure. So freedom is a precarious and a very diaphanous concept. And I think that people will finally stand up for their freedom when they realize they're not free to do what they want to do. And the confusion is just too great, and they're just not going to take it anymore. And it'll probably happen when the next variant comes sailing through, and they go all back to normal. And by normal, I mean back to masks and back to quarantines and back to shutdowns. So that will be when people decide, do we want our freedom, or are we going to be kind of being told what to do for the rest of our lives? And I think that might be the day of reckoning. We will either find out if the ideals of America can survive, can be fought for, because nobody really wants to fight for their rights. They don't want to be like the Revolutionary War. They don't want to be like the Civil War. They don't want to be like the Second World War or the First World War. They don't want to lay down their lives for principles like freedom. But they may have to, because you can see what's coming. Anything could happen, and we won't know exactly what happened because we've already explained, our beloved leaders, that it's all going to be a pretext. So no matter what you see, it's not what you see. So freedom, I could go on and on about that, and I have nothing more to say at this point. I know I missed something, but I wanted to kind of contrast the freedom lovers that are in the trucking industry with those high-paying union jobs and the freedom fighters in the Ukraine that think that they have a God-given right to their own ethnic or geographic entity. And they may play right into hands of dictators who can use their plight to their advantage. I know that's what I'd do. So I'll leave it at that. And in a day or two, we'll come back to this subject and see how free we are. Have a good afternoon and enjoy the day.